Good morning and welcome to the channel. In today's episode, I'm going to show you how to mud, or how I mud. There are different techniques and ways to go about it, but we're all trying to achieve the same thing at the end of the day. So I'll show you how I do it. There's an area inside which has a outside corner, inside corner, an off angle, and a flat. So that's basically all the scenarios that you'll run into in your basic house mudding. Is that I'm going to use colored mud to help you visualize the different steps and coats needed to achieve that smooth finish. So in the first coat I'll use red, second coat probably blue mud, and third coat white. Hopefully it works. Hopefully the camera can pick up on it a little better than white mud going onto a white wall. That's the goal anyways. But before we even begin, I thought I'd give you a bit of a rundown about what we're trying to accomplish and achieve with the drywall. So first of all, your drywall comes in different lengths. There's 8, 10, 12, 14. The idea behind that is because we're trying to eliminate as many seams as we can in our drywall installation. That just makes for an easier install and a smoother finish at the end of the day and less work. So, but all those pieces are the same, they're just longer. So you'll have a tapered edge, which is this one, and you'll have a factory square edge, which are at the end of the sheets. When two square edged pieces come together, it's called a butt end. When two lengths meet, those are the seams we're trying to eliminate because they do take longer to mud and sand, whereas the tapered seam, which run the length of the piece of drywall, when those butt up and meet, they create a bit of a valley, and that leads to an easier mudding application because it has a place for our tape to go. Those are the two common type of seams. There are situations where you have a tapered edge running to a butt end edge or vice versa, where sometimes there's a thickness difference if you're using 5/8 drywall or 1/2 inch. But for all this, we'll just assume that we're going to be using 1/2 inch, and the only seams that we'll run into are the butt end seams and the tapered edge seams. I'll draw a picture to show you what those look like. So this would be our square edge seam, and then below it I'll do a tapered one. Here's what the tapered edge looks like. So one of the most important things to remember for these seams is that wherever there's a seam, whether it's two pieces coming together or new drywall meeting against old drywall, whatever it is, if there's a gap or a seam, it has to be taped. So the one way we achieve that continuous plane on our wall and that smooth finish that we want to try and get is by taping all of our seams with paper tape. So what we're doing by using a piece of tape to cover our seams is we're basically making one sheet of drywall. A sheet of drywall is basically just chalk sandwiched between two pieces of paper. So by adding another piece of paper over top of our seams, we're essentially creating one continuous sheet. So for our butt seam, we'll do a layer of mud, which will look like that, because we need some mud for our tape to stick to, and then our tape will go on top of that. We'll embed our tape on top of that mud. So this would be our first coat of mud, and to finish it off, we would use I prefer using a 10-inch curved trowel, which looks like this. And what we would use that for is creating a hump, because we want to cover that tape now. So this would all become mud, and that would be considered our first coat of mud. So this will dry a bit as the mud dries because there's moisture in the mud, and once it evaporates it will shrink a bit, but not as much as our tapered seam because there's no place for the mud to go, there's no valley. So we're left with a bigger hump that we have to try and feather out more, and that's where a butt end seam ends up being a lot wider than a tapered seam, maybe closer to 3 feet wide by the time you're done with it. So from this point on, what we could do is add another hump on either side, and that would still be part of our first coat. And then when that dries, we would use a 14-inch flat trowel, similar to this, just not curved. And from high point to high point, we would mud. And from high point to high point. And once this all becomes mud, we've feathered out that hump enough where you don't visually see it, the sun doesn't catch it, and make a shadow. So that's a butt end joint. And I'm going to interrupt real quick with what I was just saying, because there's another way to go about doing a butt seam, and chances are you're probably going to use this way a little more often than what I am currently showing you, because to cover up that tape on a butt seam, you're going to end up with a pretty high mound. So there is a different way we can feather that whole seam out so it looks a little better. I'll do it real quick for you. So if this is our butt seam again, we apply some mud, we apply our tape, and then instead of making a mound that comes this way, we actually make a mound here and a mound here, and then we wait for this to dry, and then we use a 10-inch or 14-inch curve again and create a mound here, and then using a flat trowel, 14-inch preferably, we can go from the high point here and feather it off on either side. So this is just an alternative method in case your tape is sticking up too high for your hump to cover here and you have to build up the whole thing a little higher. Using this way, you probably add almost a 1/4 inch extra thickness of mud. So you'll actually probably end up using this more because chances of you being able to cover your tape with this mount might be a little slim. But those are the two more common options that I've seen done, and I use both depending on the situation. Okay, back to what I was just saying. So that's a butt end joint, and then for a tapered seam, we do the same thing. We'd apply a coat of mud. This one would be in the valley, and then we would do our coat of tape, embed our tape into that mud, and we would probably go over it again with that 10-inch curve, although you could use a flat here, depending. There are different ways you can do it, but say we use a 10-inch curve. And that's much more of a gradual curve than our butt end joint was because it can go into that valley a bit. So this would be the first coat. And to feather that out, if we did a 10-inch curve, we could just go ahead with a 14-inch flat trowel like we did for this top one, and we would use the 10-inch or 10-inch flat on this side and a 10-inch flat on the other side, going from the high point of the hump to wherever it makes contact with the drywall. And that would be the third and final coat for our tapered seam. And then there are the inside and outside corners, which I can show you real quick. So for our outside and inside corner, we can use the same paper tape for our inside corner. It comes creased down the center of the piece, so we could just bend it on that crease, and that can become our inside corner. For the outside corner, we can use this, which is basically a piece of metal to make it rigid, coated with paper to make it adhere and for the mud to stick to and for paint to stick to. So we'll use that for outside corner. And it's basically the same as the other ones. We have to lay down some mud first in order for our tape to adhere. So if this is our mud, then we can lay our tape in. And then this would be the first coat. For our second coat, we would actually do it right away and do one side of the exposed tape, which would be this side. We would use the 4-inch knife, go from the inside of the corner to wherever it makes contact with the drywall, like that. So this would become all mud. And then we'd wait for this side to dry before we mud this side using that 4-inch knife again. That would be the second coat. And then our third and final coat, we would use maybe a 5 or 6-inch knife to make it a little wider to feather it out, and just do a real thin pull with it, just to make it a little more gradual. So that would be the inside corner. For our outside corner, we have to do the same thing, lay some mud first, and then use our corner bead, embed it, and our corner bead actually has a little bit of a high point on the corner, right here. So even though that this is our first coat of mud, we could actually do a second coat right away, and with our 4-inch knife again, go off this high point to wherever it makes contact with the drywall again, and we can do the other side right away as well. And then once that is dry, we can do our third and final coat, again with a wider knife, maybe a 4 or 5-inch, going from the high point to wherever it makes contact with the drywall again. And that would be our third and final coat. This is obviously over exaggerated just so you can see the different layers and everything, but that's what we're trying to achieve with that. So these are the 4 most common situations you'll run into that you have to mud. There are the outside off angles and the inside off angles. Off angles meaning that they aren't a true 90 like these inside and outside corners are. And for those, we use a flexible corner bead, which can work for either inside or outside off angles. And it's the same application as these outside inside corners. You apply mud first, adhere the outside corner or inside corner to that mud, and after you've embedded it into the mud, you can go over it right away with that 4-inch knife on either side of the paper, doing your second coat immediately. And then this product says it's only 2 coats, or it's actually called no coat. Don't know how you do it with no coats though, so it's designed to do the first and second coat right away, and then I'll probably end up doing a 3rd coat just so I run into less problems. It's always easier to apply wet mud than remove dry mud, so that's a top tip. So that does it for the explanation and the drawings here. Hopefully it makes sense for you. We will be using that colored mud for each step. So for the first coat, I'm going to use red mud, 3rd coat probably blue, and then final coat just the regular white mud. Hopefully the camera picks up on it a little easier and it's beneficial to you. So let's jump inside and start. That's actually going to do it for this video. For the first coat of mud, I'll do a separate video for, as well as the 2nd coat and 3rd coat, just to break it up a bit. So feel free to click through to the next video, which will be the first coat of mud. But as for this one, thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.